Hey friends, welcome to another Learn With Me video. This time we're going to attempt to make a Regency shift. Okay, I told you I was trying to get into more historical costuming, historical clothing, and I thought it'd start from the inside out is to start with a historical Regency shift. All my methods may not be historical and all my materials may not be historical, but I'm doing the best with what I can. Like I said, I am starting. So when you start, you have to start somewhere. And like we said in the beginning, just start. So we're going to attempt to make a Regency shift. And so by the end of this video, we should have one. Okay, fabric choices for this Regency shift. In the Regency period, shifts were made out of cotton or linen. So I have a nice cotton muslin here actually that I think will be too thick for this project. I don't feel that this is going to be comfortable or as comfortable as the linen. This is a handkerchief weight linen, so I think we're gonna go with the linen. I've washed and dried this linen, so it is pre-shrunk, and the only thing left now is we need to iron this. So don't you wish it went that fast in real life? So I like to plan out my projects in a project notebook, or just a plain old notebook would work as well. Graphing out or drawing out my pieces, especially if I don't make a paper pattern. I like to have pictures of what my pieces will look like and the measurements on them. When I did up my mock-up and adjusted my sizes and my measurements to what worked best on this project, I ended up actually doing 3 mock-ups because I have never done this before. I've never drafted a pattern for a garment before, so this is what I did. And so measured it all up, drew it all out on here. I marked my grain line. I just like to have that on any of my patterns so that I know if something is cut off grain, I know that that will be pointed out. So all my pieces are cut this way on the grain, and then I put in my materials that I'm using. I'm using linen. I'll need some twill tape and thread. Basically, it's fairly simple. We'll have the body piece for this that is narrower at the shoulders, wider at the bottom. And so I measured that out on myself. I made sure that it worked for me. I've tried the first couple of tries on this. I tried other patterns or suggestions for drafting patterns online, and they just didn't work for my body type. And you'll find that certain things don't work for your body type. So you have to try until you get it right, because there is a garment out there or a way to draft things out there that will fit your body type. So what I ended up doing was measuring across my shoulders, and I added a few inches because I wanted the neck in here to be able to be cinched up a little bit with the drawstring, and that's what the twill tape is for. And then I made sure that at the point that it was going to hit my hips, that it was going to be wide enough for my hips. What I wanted to do by doing that was keep it narrow enough through the hips that it wasn't going to give me a lot of bulk at the waist. Because I'm going to be wearing this under a corset, of course, or stays. And then I drafted out my sleeve pattern. This is 8 inches long from the shoulder point down. I may make this shorter on the finished garment, but on the mock-up it worked out fairly well, and I didn't hem the sleeve on the mock-up, so I may chop off the sleeve a little bit more on the actual garment. And then there's a 5-inch by 5-inch gusset that will go underneath the arm so that when you raise and lower your arm, the side of the shift does not go up and down. Important to be able to raise and lower your arms. Then I drafted out the neck. It's going to have an 8-inch scoop in the front and a 4-inch drop in the back. And I put that all on my mock-up. I put in the twill tape drawstring across here. and it worked out fairly well. So we'll see how it works on the linen. What I used for my mock-up was a bed sheet, so it is a a cotton poly blend. So it was heavier than this linen that I'm going to be using. So I expect that this shift will be a lot more movable, a lot more flowy than my mock-up fabric was to finish, and I'm hoping that's the case. So we'll see how it all turns out. I like to have my instructions all listed out on my project notes because it just gives me a step-by-step, flow of how the pattern is supposed to go together, because I may draft this out and then come back, weeks or months later and go, okay, where do I go from here? Or I don't do something out of sequence and go, oh crap, now I have to rip out all these seams. So anyway, that's my rhyme or reason for this, and that's why I wanted to show you this project notes, because it's part of my learning process in getting things squared away in my brain, is to write them down. So it may be different for you. You may be able to keep it all straight in your mind, but I'm a list maker and a planner, and so I like to write it all out. So our next step is to cut out all the pieces. Let's go. Okay, so here we are in my bedroom. This becomes my makeshift cutting table a lot of the time when I'm cutting bigger pieces. And the reason for that is I don't have floor space or a large cutting table in my craft room. So I clear off my bed and I use my bed. And the only time I've cut a sheet is when I am making a mock-up and using a bed sheet to make a mock-up. So knock on wood, I haven't actually cut a sheet that's meant to stay a sheet. So let's get started on the cutting. And before we cut with linen, I am told, to get this straight, the best tip is to pull up a thread, which means to remove a thread across the width of the fabric. That will give you a straight cutting line. So that's what we are going to do next. Alright, so here we are. Got a close up, it's a nice light. And what we're going to do is we're going to pull out one of these little bitty threads running through here that goes the width of the fabrics. Then we're going to take a small little needle and pull out one of these threads. So I'm just going to go along here where this little cut is and grab one of these threads from the edge. Try to get just one and start working it out. And I think we got one right there. So we're going to grab it, try to grab it with my fingernails and pull. There it goes. A little hard to see because it's tiny. And we're going to see if this one will go across and not off the end of the fabric. Hopefully the fabric wasn't cut so deep in the middle that this will end instead of going all the way across. So we're just going to start working this out. And I'm just going to keep pulling. And the goal is to try and get this thread to come all the way out in one go. Usually never happens. I've done this before with cotton, and usually, at least with cotton, it breaks quite frequently. So try to keep somewhat of it gathered up so you can find the end where it broke, but in the meantime try to gather. Oh, it just broke. So I'm going to slide the rest of that thread out. But it does give a nice line. I mean, I think you can see that. It does give a nice line, actually a nicer line than my cottons have. You can definitely see that enough to cut along it. So now that we've got our nice straight edge, we're going to cut out our pieces. I'm going to have this be my bottom the bottom edge of my shift, and so I folded this over so I have a nice straight bottom edge, and measured her up. I have a nice big ruler here, little bit, it's a 48-inch ruler. I really liked it. I bought it for lumber purposes, but it works great for my fabric. So I'm going to fold this in half because my pieces each are supposed to be 30 inches wide for the bottom of my shift. So make sure these are lined up, and let's see what do we got here. We have, we have 29.5 inches folded. So, you know, the bottom of my shift, I don't think that inch is going to make all that much of a difference. And if I get it all finished and it isn't as wide as I want, I can add a small gusset in there somewhere after the fact. So I'm going to go with the 29 inches at the bottom just because it fits my fabric really well, and I don't think it's going to make that much of a difference to my fabric at the bottom edge of my shift. So we're going to go with that, and I'm going to fold this up, and then we're going to measure up 40 inches for the top, and I'm going to pull another thread because I want the top of my shift to be all square as well. Okay, so now we have our nice squared piece of fabric. We are going to cut the main body pieces of the fabric. So I need a 40-inch long piece, and then it's tapered from 30 inches down to 21 inches. So what I've done is this has been folded in half twice. I've got the selvages here and then the center fold here toward me. This will be the outside edge of the piece, so it will actually be laid out like that. The piece will be here. The center of each piece is right here. There's two folds, okay? So we'll be cutting this like that. What I'm going to do is measure from the center fold over. I would need 21.5 inches, so divide by 2, that's 10.5 inches that I need to measure over. The ruler's upside down, but you can see that. 10.5 inches, and I'm going to make a slight pencil mark right there, okay? And the reason why I've folded this over twice is we need a front and a back. So we're going to cut the rough body pieces out at the same time. I'm going to run this all the way down to the corner of the piece because, as you remember, when I folded the piece in half, I had 29.5 inches, including the selvage. So I'm going to go ahead and go right out to the selvage because the only place there's going to be for that selvage is that teeny tiny little bottom like inch of the fabric, and that's going to be all seam allowance anyway, so it doesn't really matter. But I'm going to take and put this nice long ruler on the edge here and line it up with the other edge and mark a line. If you want, mark a line and then do scissors. Or what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to run and get my rotary cutter. Got that? These are nice tools. You can put your mark here or put your straight edge here and go ahead and cut. It's a nice handy thing. The one thing I would caution you about is if you have like my setup where I have only my cutting mat under a portion of the fabric to remember to slide it down. So I've got this all lined up, and I am going to go ahead and make sure that I have everything underneath and go ahead and cut this. So now, if I've done this correctly, we will have two pieces, a front and a back. Yep, that's exactly what we have. A front and a back piece for our shift. Okay, so I'm going to cut the square pieces, the rectangle and the square pieces for our gussets and our sleeves, and then I'll be right back. Okay, so here we are cutting the back and front necklines. We're going to mark a line at 4 inches from each end. I'm doing this voiceover because my sound turned out really crappy on this part of the video. So marking 4 inches on each end, and this is cutting the neckline for the front piece. And then I'm going to measure down 8 inches for the front neckline. And then we're going to draw down from each of the 4-inch marks down part way towards the bottom line. We don't want to go the whole way because it's going to be curved. So we'll mark a line down on each side. And then we'll mark a line across from the bottom mark towards the other two, but again, not all the way because we're going to have that be curved. So I'm going to grab an object to curve my lines, and I found this little box that I had just sitting in my craft room, and we're going to use that to curve that, to make that curve on each side of the neckline. And the back of the neckline is done the same way, except I'm only coming down 4 inches from the top. Okay, so now I've cut the necklines, and the next step is to pin together the shoulders and get those sewn. Okay, so we're ready to sew the shoulder seams. I'm going to be using a combination of hand stitching and machine stitching, making things go a little bit faster. So I will machine stitch the shoulder seams and then I will hand fill them. So the sleeves are both attached, and the next thing we're going to do is work with the gussets. Okay, so both sleeves are on, the side seams have been sewn up to a point, and I also sewed about a couple of inches, about 2 inches on the end of each sleeve, leaving this area open for our gussets. So next we're going to pin our gussets in. So anyway, this is the opening. This is the bottom of the sleeve. Here's our sleeve. Right here, here's the two sides of the sleeve. We're going to start with the first point and match that up to the seam allowance on the sleeve at that point and just follow it up to wherever it stops. So we're going to pin that in place. I'm going to go kind of that way. And once in the middle. And again over here. Okay, so that's the first side. The second side is going to be pinned in place on the opposite side of the sleeve. So start again at the corner, the armpit corner of that sleeve that we left unsewed, and pin that in place, working your way back towards the end of the sleeves, toward the cuff of the sleeve. And pin that in place. And we'll put one more final pin down here. And just be careful you don't pin the other side of the sleeve together. Keep that completely free. And I see, oh, I thought I did. I didn't. Okay, and then we will also be finishing up this little seam. And you'll see that this little point where the two lines meet will be, it will be where the bottom of the sleeve meets, right there. So we'll be sewing this up as well. But I will be sewing those two areas first, and then we will be continuing down the side of the shift with the other two sides. But it's very important that you start and stop at these points here. Don't go all the way to the edge of this seam allowance. Stop sewing at where these lines intersect. So. Okay, so what I did was sewed the eyelets, then I took a length of the twill tape and I threaded it through a blunt needle or tapestry needle. I measured around the edge of the neckline and made the drawstring about, I don't know, about 3-4 inches longer on each end than the circumference of the neckline, so that we have, you know, a way to tie it, obviously, and it'll hang out when it's completely ungathered together. So, but when we gather it, it's going to be a lot longer, so you'll have plenty of length to tie it. Okay, so now we have the drawstring, the twill tape, put through the two eyelets up here. So then our next step is to do the casing for the drawstring. Now this has been folded over once and pressed, and it will be folded over again, encasing that drawstring, and then we'll fell it into place. That is the easiest way of putting in a drawstring. There are other methods. The most common way to insert a drawstring is to sew the casing and then use a needle or a other device. Some people use safety pins. This case, the casing is going to be about 1/4 inch wide, or just a slightly more. So, and this is 1/8 inch wide twill tape. A lot of people use like the blunt needle to fish it through, you know, you thread the needle and then fish it up the casing and around. That's fine if you'd like to. I like to put it in, like I said, put it in, fold it over, and sew the casing. Just being careful not to catch the twill tape or the drawstring in your stitches. So that's what we're going to be doing next. Okay, so here we are. I finished the neckline encasing the drawstring. I added some hems to the sleeves, just a simple hem to the sleeves and to the bottom. This worked really well. I loved working with the linen. I learned a lot about working with linen. It shifts, like the threads shift in it, almost like they're silky, and they move against each other very easily, a lot more easily than cotton does. And they can be pulled out of sync a little bit more easily than that. But it's easy to work with. Surprisingly easy to work with. It doesn't shift under the sewing machine at all like a shinier fabric does, but it's really soft. I really like it, and this was just a very interesting project, and like I said, I learned a lot from it, so I'm hoping that you learned the same. And here's how it looks on the hanger. And a shift is worn as the first layer of clothing next to the skin, underneath stays or a corset. So we won't be modeling that. But learned a lot. I hope you did too. Coming up, we will be having some recipes and some more Regency fashions. So please stay with me, and we'll see you next time. Bye-bye.